your Friday, May 29th post. I hope you guys had a good week. We'll be continuing on with our Earth's crust lesson and talk a little bit about the structure of the Earth today. I have a video for you and some questions for you to answer at the end that are based on today's lesson as well as our previous lesson on Wednesday. So we'll go through that together. I'll highlight some things, and then that'll be all for today. So starting with the Earth's crust, lesson 2. Last class, we talked about the theory of continental drift, where we talked about how the continents weren't always where they are. They drifted there over time due to the shifting of the Earth. This led us to the theory of plate tectonics. And in order to better understand this, we need to first learn about the structure of the Earth and what this theory entails. So as we watch the video, which is right here, you're going to label a diagram of the Earth, which I've provided for you, and it looks like this. We'll talk about it in just a little bit, but basically the Earth is separated into 4 different layers. We have the crust, the mantle, the inner core, and the outer core. So you'll be labeling this diagram here as you follow along with the video, and then I'll give you information to write onto these lines in just a second. But this is what you'll be labeling as the video goes through. And then we will talk about filling in those other lines. So on those lines, you're going to write down a little bit of information about those different layers. So we have the crust, which is where the continents and the oceans are on, and they range anywhere from 5 kilometers thick to 40 kilometers thick. So a pretty good thickness around, and then that's where the continents are. And then on the ocean, they're a little bit thinner. They're about 5 to 10 kilometers thick when there's ocean, and more, get a little bit thicker, 5 to 40, where the continents are. That would lead us to the mantle, which is a little bit closer to the core, which is more dense, so it's thicker, it's more tightly packed, and it's a semi-solid rock layer. So that's where we get a lot of our molten rock from. It's 2,900 kilometers thick, and added pressure makes the mantle hotter and, again, more compact. So the pressure from Earth's gravity and the weight of the continents and the oceans make it a little bit more dense. We then have the outer core, which is, again, about 2,200 kilometers thick. And this layer is liquid and made up of metals rather than stone. And this layer rotates or spins, which gives the Earth its magnetic field. And then the inner core is one of the thinner layers of the core parts at only 1,250 kilometers thick. And this is solid because of all the extra gravity and weight on it. It's actually a solid layer. When we talk about the plates, so the Earth is actually a giant puzzle. All of those continents and are on different plates, which allow the Earth to move and shift and have the continents go to where they are. So these plates move through a process called convection. So we talked a little bit about that in our heat unit and how convection is warm air will rise, and then as it gets up here, it starts to lose energy and then come back down, and it just sort of loops like that over and over again. The plates move through a process of convection currents. So the heat from the core rises up through the mantle to the crust, and that expands the Earth. So our Earth is like this. When there's added heat, it expands and separates. This causes the crust to rise and separate, and then when it comes back down, it doesn't come back perfectly together, but that gap is filled in by magma, which eventually hardens because it cools. But that's why our continents and our planet tends to shift, because the plates are like this. They get pushed apart and separate. The magma fills in this gap here, and then when it cools down, we've created new Earth. However, there's lots of things that can happen when these plates start to move, which we'll talk about next class. So it's not just as simple as them rising and separating, cooling, and then having new Earth filled. Something has to happen in order for them to have room to move, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And that's the end of this lesson, actually. It's pretty short, pretty straightforward. And then here are the questions. Ignore the part when these the due date. I'll put a due date on the Edmodo post for you guys, a suggested due date. But these are the 3 questions that you have to answer. So what was the first clue they had back in the 17th century that continents may not have always looked as they do today? So that's back from our first lesson. What were the 3 kinds of evidence Wagner collected to support his idea? Again, 3 marks because you're coming up with 3 different ideas. And then what are the 4 layers that make up our Earth? So we just talked about that at the beginning of this lesson, and you watched a video about it. And that's all that you guys will have to do. So you've got the filling in the worksheet that I showed you earlier. as well as answering these 3 questions. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I hope you guys have a great weekend.